back in January, the Washington Post reported that President Trump, who lost the election 2 months earlier, urged a Georgia election official to, quote, find the fraud, going on to tell the person they'd become, quote, a national hero if they did. Now the Washington Post says they got the quotes wrong, but they stand by the substance of the story. Earlier this month, the Wall Street Journal got hold of a conversation between former President Donald Trump and Frances Watson, an elections investigator for Georgia's Secretary of State.
And I want everything but Georgia, and, something happened there. Something bad happened.
Those are the president's words, but at no point in the recording does he tell Watson to find the fraud.
You have the most important job in the country right now, because if we win Georgia...
And that's the closest Trump came to suggesting Watson would be a national hero. But he never used the exact phrase. So the Washington Post issued a correction, saying in part, the recording revealed that the Post misquoted Trump's comments on the call.
This is probably the worst media screw-ups I've ever seen, directly attributing false quotes to the President of the United States.
That might be an overstatement, but it's pretty bad. For one, other media outlets, including USA Today, CNN, ABC, and NBC, reported the misquotes, all saying they had independent confirmation.
The Washington Post took a single source, providing secondhand information, and put quotation marks around a conversation.
And there's the rub. The Washington Post's source, who came forward and identified herself as Jordan Fuchs, was the same source everyone else used. Fuchs was briefed on the call, but not on it. So while what Fuchs told the Washington Post wasn't exactly right, they got the gist of President Trump's message right. So, Dan, this is bizarre to me because the fact that the Washington Post put quotes around it, that was the main problem. If they had said, here's the gist of the conversation, I never understood that unless I assumed they had heard the conversation, but they didn't.
Yeah, I don't understand that either because, as Jordan Fuchs had said, she talked to the Post and gave them a summary of what she had heard from Watson. And when you get a summary, that's nothing that you can put quotation marks around. And they knew that. And what's really unfortunate about this is that it is cast doubt on the Post's earlier story, which was based on a recording that we all heard, in which Trump issued sort of similar admonitions to Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State in Georgia. That story is still solid. And unfortunately, this is being used to discredit all of the Post reporting, even though this story was correct in substance. You've got to get the quotes right, and don't use quotation marks if you're not sure.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this was sort of a botched story in some ways, right? Because it wasn't even that their source was a primary participant in the conversation, so they could believe that she would accurately have the quotes. She was a secondhand party to the conversation. So that was a mistake from jump. They had to issue the correction. What choice did they have at that point? But to me, what's sort of the larger problem here is the way they wrote the correction. As journalists, we know that you have to issue a correction, but how you frame the correction is also part of the story. And here, I feel like the way they wrote it made it, gave Trump cover, right? The way they wrote it made it seem like the gist of what he had said was actually totally wrong. And in fact, he essentially said those things, just not in those words. And I think they could have written the correction in a way that didn't give him quite so much cover.
Well, I have to say, Susie, that, yeah, you're absolutely right about that. But I think they were trying to maybe beat their breasts a little bit hard to say, okay, we know we made a mistake, so let us put on the hair shirt and so forth. I do think this was like the parlor game that we all perhaps used to play where everybody stands in a long line and you start out whispering in each other's ear a certain fact, and by the time the last person gets it and repeats it back, it's nowhere close to what started.
Telephone.
That's the situation that's happened as the story went on. I do think, though, that if there is a real outrage that comes from this, it is the way the Republicans have spun it, because they have now come out and without any attempt to stick to the facts, they have claimed that the Washington Post's first story somehow impacted the Senate vote in Georgia, which would have been utterly impossible since the Senate vote happened 4 days before the Post story even appeared. But you can look now at the social media feeds of a number of Republican congressmen and still see that lie being repeated. So I'm going to hold my outrage back, say, yes, we all agree that what the Washington Post did was terrible, and they deserve to get knocked around for that. But it is, I think it pales in comparison to the way the Republicans are spinning it.
Mm. Yeah, I've been on right-wing radio and also on OAN and other sites, and I think that the mainstream media has actually beaten up the Washington Post more than the right-wing media has, which is kind of surprising. I think the right-wing media has seen that even with the correction, the president still looks like a bully, and he doesn't come off that well. And so they've really backed off on that, and they have been putting their attention toward things like catching John Kerry without a face mask at a private moment, or every time a Democrat refuses to answer a question, or what they call the Biden tax hike. So they've really moved on quickly, and it is almost like the hair shirt, like Tom said. It's this confession, the self-flagellation, worked great for Henry II in the 12th century. But, the 21st century, this looks really silly. And it makes newsrooms, I think it really sullies the reputation of newsrooms. And we should just confess and get it over with and then move on.